His wolf had kept its silence for 200 years. One clever maid broke it in a day. Every alpha king in my line had tried. My great-grandfather spent 3 years in that tower room, speaking soft words to the creature by candlelight. My grandfather offered raw elk, silver-wrapped bones, even the rarest moonbloom from the high slopes. The wolf that lived in the sealed stone tower at the heart of Greyvale Castle simply lay with its great head on its paws and watched him with pale gold eyes and said nothing. My own father tried singing. Not well, I am told. The wolf did not comment. It never did. It had not spoken since the age of my 4th great-grandmother's reign, when it had reportedly said one sentence, one, to a woman no one now remembered, and then gone quiet, and stayed quiet, and outlived everyone who had witnessed it. 200 years of silence. I inherited the wolf when I took my crown at 23. I had been warned, of course. My advisors told me the beast was decorative, a symbol only, a remnant of old magic that no longer functioned. The wolf, they said, was mine to house and feed and display at ceremonies, and it would never trouble me with conversation. Most kings would have considered that a relief. I did not. The moment I stepped through the tower door on the day of my crowning and met those pale gold eyes, something in my chest, something that was mine, but also older than me, something woven into my blood and bone and the marrow of my wolf nature, said, "She is waiting." Not he, she. I did not understand that then. I filed it away and ignored it the way kings learn to ignore things that do not fit neatly into governance. For 7 years, I visited the tower every fortnight. I tried calm words and sharp commands, patience and silence, offerings of meat and offerings of moonflowers. I sat with her through storms. I told her about the kingdom, because I had no one else to tell who would not immediately begin scheming based on what I revealed. She listened beautifully. She simply never answered. I named her Sable, in private. She had been called the White Wolf by the histories, which I found lazy. She was not white. She was the color of new snow just before the clouds break and the moon comes through, the exact shade where silver becomes light. I called her Sable because it was the name she seemed to ignore least aggressively. I had more or less resigned myself to the silence when everything changed on a Tuesday. I know it was a Tuesday because the weekly castle accounts are reviewed on Tuesdays, and my steward had just finished telling me that we were going through candle wax at an unsustainable rate. I was not paying attention. I was watching, through the high window of the east corridor, a young woman I had never seen before carry a basket of linens across the inner courtyard at a pace that suggested she had somewhere important to be, and the courtyard was personally inconveniencing her. She was not running. Running would have been undignified, and she seemed, even at a distance, to have decided opinions about dignity. Her back was straight, her chin level, her stride long and unhurried, and somehow also extremely efficient. She wore the gray dress of the castle laundry staff, her dark hair pinned up in the practical knot of a woman who does not have time for it to fall in her face, and she was arguing with the basket. Not with a person, with the basket. Her lips were moving. The basket, which had developed a lopsided tilt that threatened to deposit half its contents on the stone, did not respond to her commentary, but she addressed it with calm authority anyway, as she reached up and corrected the tilt with one hand without breaking stride. "Who is that?" I asked my steward, who had been saying something about beeswax. He peered out the window. "I believe that is the new laundry maid, Your Majesty. She came to us from Tallow Mill 3 weeks ago. Very efficient, I'm told. Head of laundry says she's reorganized the drying rotation and reduced the time to full dry by nearly half." "Has anyone told her not to walk through the inner courtyard?" He looked at me. "It is the most direct route to the east wing drying racks, Your Majesty." I looked back out the window. She had reached the far side and vanished through an archway. I thought, efficient. I forgot about her for approximately 4 days. Then she appeared in my wolf's tower. I was not there when it happened. I arrived to find the door, which was kept latched but not locked, as the wolf never tried to leave, standing open, and voices coming from within. One voice, technically. A single clear voice, talking in the businesslike tone of someone giving a patient explanation to something that is taking too long to understand a reasonable point. I stopped in the doorway. The young woman from the courtyard was sitting cross-legged on the stone floor in front of Sable. The wolf was not lying with her head on her paws in the attitude of magnificent disengagement she maintained for everyone else. She was sitting up, her ears were forward, Her pale gold eyes were fixed on the young woman with an expression I had never seen on her face in 7 years of visits, which I can only describe as interested. The young woman had a cloth and a small jar of something and was, very calmly, treating a scratch on Sable's left shoulder that I had not known was there. "I know you don't want me to make a fuss about it," the young woman was saying, in the tone of someone who has already had this argument and won. "But the thing about scratches in stone towers is that they get damp and then they get worse. It's going to sting for a moment and then it'll be done and you'll feel better and you won't even remember we had this conversation." She applied whatever was in the jar. Sable's ear flicked. She did not move away. "There, see? Already better. You have very clean fur, by the way. I was not expecting that. I assumed with all the stone dust it would be, well, never mind what I assumed. I was wrong and you were right, even though you didn't say anything about it." Sable looked at her. The young woman looked back, completely unintimidated by the great pale eyes, the size of the creature, the 200 years of silence and legend she was sitting approximately 12 inches from. "I found you in the accounts," she said conversationally. "We have a supply line for wolfsbane-free tallow oil. It's for the cook's joint pain, but it works just as well on scratches. And I noticed the tower on the supply manifest and asked who lived here. Apparently everyone knows and no one talks about it, which seems strange, but so does most of what happens in this castle, so." She recapped her jar. "I'll come back tomorrow to check it. Don't let it get wet." She stood, brushed off her dress with the efficiency of someone who has stood up from stone floors many times, picked up her cloth and her jar, and turned toward the door. She saw me. To her credit, she did not drop anything. She went very still for exactly 1 moment, the kind of stillness that precedes either flight or a decision, and then she said, composedly, "Your Majesty," and dipped into a curtsy. I said, because it was the first thing in my head, "How did you get in here?" "The door was open, Your Majesty." "The door is always latched." "It was open today." A slight pause. "Perhaps the latch is wearing. I can have someone look at it." I looked at Sable. Sable looked back at me, with an expression that, on a human face, would have read as, "I have no comment." The young woman's name was Mira. I learned this from my steward the following morning, after I had spent approximately 3 hours lying awake thinking about the way Sable had been sitting up. In 7 years. Never once had the wolf sat up for me. I had stopped hoping for it so long ago I hadn't noticed I'd stopped. Mira, from Tallow Mill. 22 years old. Parents were a miller and a seamstress. She had come to Greyvale because, according to my steward's impeccably thorough investigation, she wanted to work somewhere that had more interesting problems. He delivered this last piece of information in the tone of a man who finds it faintly alarming and is not sure what to do with it. I sent him away and thought about interesting problems. I went back to the tower the next day, at the same time she had been there the previous one. She was already there. She did not seem surprised to see me. "How is the scratch?" I asked Sable, which was a strange thing to say to a wolf who had not spoken in 200 years, but Mira had spoken to her that way, and so it seemed reasonable. Sable looked at her shoulder, then at me. "Better," said Mira, who was checking it. "The oil worked. There's no dampness." She glanced at me over her shoulder. "She communicates a great deal with her ears, you know. Most people don't seem to notice." I noticed. I had always noticed. I had simply never had anything to compare it to. "What is she saying now?" I asked. Mira studied Sable's ears for a moment with the focused attention of someone doing a real assessment. Something like, "I knew you'd come back," but more dignified than that, more, "I expected this would happen." She tilted her head. She seems, I want to say pleased, but that's not quite right. Satisfied. Like something is going the way it was supposed to. I stood there and looked at my wolf, who was looking at Mira, and felt something shift in my chest. That older-than-me feeling again, the one woven into blood and bone. She is waiting. "You read ears," I said. "I read ears," Mira agreed, without any particular pride in it, the way one states a skill that is useful but not remarkable. "Grew up around my uncle's dogs. The principle is the same." She stood, putting her things away. "I'll leave you two to your visit, Your Majesty. I'll check her again tomorrow." "Stay," I said. She paused. I realized that had come out as an order, which was not my intention. I amended it. "If you have time." I have never had anyone here who could read her. In 7 years. Mira looked at me for a moment with an expression I could not quite identify. Then she sat back down, with the particular unself-consciousness of a person who sits on stone floors regularly and has long since made peace with it. "All right," she said. "What would you like to know?" What followed was the strangest hour I had spent in a very long time, and my life had contained some genuinely unusual hours. Mira translated Sable's ears. Not continuously, she was careful to say when she wasn't certain, which I found more convincing than if she had been confident about everything. What she could read, the angle of interest, forward, the angle of tolerance, level, the angle of mild reproach, tilted back, left higher than right, which apparently meant something specific. What she couldn't read, the long, still moments when Sable simply watched, her ears perfectly level, and her pale gold eyes moving between us, with something that felt, to me, like assessment. "What is she doing when she does that?" I asked once. Mira looked at Sable, looking at us. "I'm not sure," she said, honestly. "But she does it differently when we're both here than when it's just me. The angle is different." A pause. "It might be comparing, I don't know. It's above my competence." I thought, comparing. That night I sat in my study for a long time without looking at any of the documents on my desk. My wolf nature, which was mine but also older, the thing I had inherited along with the crown and the wolf in the tower and the 200 years of silence, was very awake. It was doing something I had not felt it do since I was young. It was paying attention. Mira came to the tower every day. She never asked permission, and she did not seem to think she needed to, which was audacious in the specific way of people who are doing something so obviously sensible that the idea of it being forbidden has not occurred to them. She came at the same time each day, before the afternoon drying shift, which she had apparently reorganized so thoroughly that it now ran itself for 2 hours without her supervision. I began to arrange my schedule to be there. We did not talk about this. It was simply a thing that happened. She arrived, I was there, and neither of us commented on it. We talked about Sable. We talked about the scratch, which healed cleanly. We talked about what the wolf ate. She had opinions about the elk cut. Mira agreed they could do better, and had words with the kitchen about it, which I was later told caused considerable alarm, but produced results. We talked about the ears. I learned, across those days, that Mira had a particular quality I had rarely encountered in the castle. She said exactly what she thought, in measured words, without calculating what I wanted to hear. Not rudely, not recklessly, simply directly, with a kind of easy honesty that assumed I was capable of hearing a thing and thinking about it without requiring it to be wrapped in elaborate cushioning first. Most people could not do this. Most people had so thoroughly learned to perform what they thought I wanted that the performance was all that was left. She told me, on the 4th day, that the tallow oil supplier was overcharging by about 15%, and she had found a better source in the South Market. I said I would tell my steward. She said she had already told him, but he seemed uncertain about whether a laundry maid's market research was appropriate to act on. I told her I would tell him it was. She said, "Thank you, though he might take it better if it seemed like your idea." I looked at her. She looked back, entirely comfortable. "You're suggesting I take credit for your work. I'm suggesting you allow the result to occur, without requiring the process to be credited correctly, because the result is what matters." A slight pause. "It's 15%, Your Majesty. That's meaningful on an annual contract." It was. I took her advice. The contract was renegotiated. My steward believed it was his own initiative, which seemed to please him. Mira, when I told her, simply nodded and made a small note in the battered record book she carried everywhere. On the 7th day, which was also, I noted, the day she had been in the tower exactly 1 week, I came up the tower stairs to hear something I had not heard in my 7 years in Greyvale Castle. A voice. Not Mira's voice. Lower. Older. A voice that felt like it came from somewhere below language, from the part of the world where things had names before humans arrived to rename them. I stopped on the stairs. "Not what I am asking," said the voice, in slow and measured words, as though it had not used language in a very long time, and was finding its way back into it, the way one finds a path through deep snow. "I am not asking what you know about him. I am asking what you think of him." A pause. Then Mira's voice, entirely level. "I think he is trying very hard to do something difficult, and that he does not have enough people around him who tell him true things." A longer pause. "That," said the old voice, with something in it that might have been amusement, might have been satisfaction, is a true thing. Is it? Good. Mira, brisk. Then I'm qualified to notice it. Silence. Then, very quietly, the old voice again, and it held in it something I had no name for, something vast and patient and warm, like a fire that has burned so long it has become the stone itself. He will be here soon. He comes every day now. I know, said Mira, and her voice had changed, gone quiet. Not uncomfortable quiet, simply careful, the way a person goes careful when something important is being said. You are not surprised by this. No, a beat. I'm not sure what to do with it, but I'm not surprised. What do you think you should do with it? I heard her breathe. I stood on the stairs and did not move. I think, she said slowly, that I should not do anything foolish based on a wolf who has been silent for 200 years suddenly deciding to have opinions. Wise, said the voice. And also wrong. The silence and the opinions are not separate. I walked up the last 3 stairs and pushed the door open. They were exactly as I had imagined. Mira, sitting cross-legged on the stone floor, her record book closed in her lap, and Sable sitting before her, with her ears perfectly forward, and her pale gold eyes on Mira's face. Both of them looked at me when I entered. Mira's expression was composed. Sable's ears said, and I had learned enough by now to read this. I expected this. I said, to Sable, because she was looking at me, and I had been trying for 7 years, and she deserved to be spoken to directly. You spoke. Yes, said Sable, in that deep, ancient, below-language voice. I did. I sat down on the stone floor. I had not sat on stone floors in approximately 15 years, since before the crown. It was cold and unpleasant, and I did not care. I sat across from my wolf, who had just spoken her second sentence in 200 years, and from the young laundry maid who had apparently caused this to happen by checking on a scratch and being honest about candle contracts. And I said, why her? Sable's ears moved. The position meant, this is not the right question. I tried again. Why now? The same reason, Sable said, that you come here every day. The same reason you sat on this floor just now, which you have not done in 15 years. Her pale gold eyes moved, briefly, to Mira. I have been waiting 200 years for the person your blood recognizes. I am not waiting any longer. Mira had gone very still. Not afraid. She didn't seem to know how to be afraid. Or at least she'd never shown evidence of it. But careful. Again. That important thing, careful. I looked at her. She's saying, Mira said slowly, that I am. Yes, I said. I think she is. A silence. Not the old silence. Not the 200-year heavy kind. A different one. The kind that happens when a great deal of information has just arrived at once and several people need a moment. I'm a laundry maid, Mira said, not arguing, stating, in the tone of someone who intends to think this through. I know. From tallow mill. Yes. Who reorganized the drying rotation? And renegotiated the tallow oil contract. She looked at me. You know about that. I know about that. I looked back at her. You said I needed people around me who tell me true things. I did say that. She looked down at her record book for a moment. I watched her face, the working of it, the way a practical mind moves through practical obstacles when it is also, underneath, dealing with something that has very little to do with practicality. Then she looked up. I should probably tell you, she said, that I noticed you were there before I noticed anything else. The first day, on the stairs. I heard you stop. I had been so certain I hadn't made a sound. I was going to leave, she said. I thought I'd overstepped with the tower. And then I thought, well, I thought the scratch needed checking and the wolf needed looking after, and I would sort out the overstepping afterward. A pause. I sorted out the overstepping by deciding not to think about it. That seems, I said, like a very efficient solution. Thank you, she said, completely serious. Then, with the faintest shift at the corner of her mouth, I'm efficient. Sable made a sound. It was, I realized, the first sound I had ever heard from her that was not a word. A low, warm exhale. The specific sound of a creature that has been patient for a very long time and is now, finally, not required to be. Her ears were forward. Her tail, for the first time in the memory of anyone living, swept across the stone floor once. Mira looked at the tail, then at me. She's pleased, she said. I know, I said. I can read ears now, too. The corner of Mira's mouth moved again, more noticeably this time. You've been practicing. You've been teaching. I looked at her, not on purpose. Most of the useful things I know, I learned by accident, she said. The purpose was something else, and the knowledge arrived alongside it. I thought about this. I thought about 7 years of visiting a tower for the purpose of hearing a wolf speak and what had arrived alongside it instead, in the last 8 days. I had advisors who told me the wolf was decorative, I said. A symbol, old magic that no longer functioned. Sable's ears said something that was, I was fairly certain, uncomplimentary about the advisors. Mira interpreted without being asked. She says they were looking at the wrong thing. Yes, I said. They were. I looked at Mira for a moment, and she looked back, steady and unperformed. What were you looking at? She thought about it honestly, which was the only way she seemed to do anything. A scratch, she said. And then an interesting problem. And? The faintest pause. And someone who needed true things. She let that sit for a moment. I didn't expect the rest of it. I want you to know that. I didn't come to the tower with any intention beyond the scratch. I know, I said. That's why it worked. She seemed to absorb this. That's why she spoke, you mean? That, I said carefully, is part of what I mean. Another silence. In the silence, Sable's tail swept the floor again, once, and her ears stayed perfectly forward. The angle of warmth, I knew now. The angle of something that has been waiting and has arrived. I have a great many questions, Mira said at last. So do I. About what is... She paused, choosing her words in the precise way of someone who is trying to be accurate, rather than cautious. What is apparently true about this situation? Yes, I looked at her. I would like to answer them, and ask my own. That seems reasonable. She uncapped her ink, opened her record book, and looked at the page in front of her. Then she looked back at me. The record book was, I realized, a joke. A small one, so dry it was almost invisible. She did not open it to write anything. She simply closed it again, set it aside on the stone, and folded her hands in her lap. Ask your questions then, she said. And I did. We sat on the cold stone floor of the tower as the afternoon light moved across the walls, and Sable lay between us with her great head at rest, her ears moving gently in the way I now knew meant that she was content, that she was at home, that something she had waited 2 centuries for had arrived and was exactly as it was supposed to be. I learned that Mira had left Tallow Mill because the work there had no more interesting problems in it, and she had felt the pull of Greyvale the way a person sometimes feels the pull of a place before they understand why. I learned that she had looked at the castle supply manifest on her first week because she likes to know the full shape of a place before she works in it, and that she had found the tower on the manifest because everything on the manifest interested her, including things marked with the notation, "Do not adjust," which she had taken as a challenge. I learned that she had knocked on the tower door the first time and, finding it open, had walked in with the pragmatic assumption that an open door means entry is acceptable, and that this had produced the scratch and the wolf and the whole chain of events that followed. I asked her if she was afraid, knowing now what she apparently was, what the bond apparently meant. She thought about it, and I valued that she thought about it instead of answering quickly. No, she said, I don't think I am. I think I would be if you were frightening, but you're not. Most people find me frightening, I said. Most people are thinking about the crown, she said simply. I've mostly been thinking about the wolf and the tallow oil. Sable's tail swept the floor. She's amused, Mira said, without looking at the wolf. I can see that. I looked at the wolf, who had watched everything with those patient, knowing gold eyes for 200 years, and who had waited, who had, somehow, always known she was waiting. For one specific morning, when a laundry maid with a jar of oil and a battered record book would walk through an open door without permission and begin fixing things. Thank you, I said to her. Sable looked at me. Her ears said, I did nothing. This is yours. She says, Mira started. I know what she says, I said, and I did. The sun had moved well past the afternoon mark when Mira finally uncrossed her legs and stood, gathering her cloth and her jar and her record book with the efficiency that was entirely her. She paused at the door. Tomorrow, she said, It was not quite a question. "Tomorrow," I said. She nodded once, with the air of a decision made cleanly. Then she went, and her footsteps on the stairs were exactly as purposeful as they had been in the courtyard the first morning I'd seen her, unhurried and efficient, and entirely sure of their direction. I sat with Sable in the quiet tower. The wolf put her great head in my lap, which she had never done. I rested my hand on her silver-pale fur and looked at the late light on the stone walls. 200 years, I said. "Yes," said Sable. "Was it worth the wait?" Her tail swept the stone, once, slow and warm and certain. It was. In the weeks that followed, the castle noticed things. The steward noticed the Alpha King's schedule had reorganized around a particular hour each afternoon. The cook noticed that the elk cut had improved. 3 junior advisors noticed that the new laundry maid seemed to know rather a lot about supply contracts for someone whose domain was linen, and that the Alpha King, when she spoke at table, for she began to attend table, quietly, at the far end, until gradually she did not attend quietly at the far end anymore, listened the way he listened to very few people. The wolf was heard to speak one morning when a senior advisor came to the tower unannounced to ask the Alpha King something urgent. The advisor reported afterward, in the slightly dazed tone of a man who had received information he did not know how to file, that the wolf had told him the matter could wait and then turned her head away. No one could explain it. Several people tried. My steward eventually wrote it in the record as, "The wolf spoke, reason unknown, in the presence of the maid from Tallow Mill, and the Alpha King seems unsurprised by this." He was not wrong. I was not surprised. I had been waiting for it longer than I had understood, and when it came exactly the way she did everything, directly, without ceremony, and with an efficiency that made everything afterwards simpler than it had been before. Mira, when I showed her the record entry, read it once, looked at the notation reason unknown, and said, "That part's not quite right." "No," I said, "but I'm not sure how to record the real reason in the official accounts." She thought about it. Then she picked up the pen and, in her neat and practical hand, crossed out reason unknown and wrote in its place, a scratch. And below that, in smaller letters, "Some problems are interesting." She set the pen down, looked at what she'd written, and seemed satisfied. Behind us, in the tower, Sable made the sound she made now on the best mornings, that low, warm exhale, 200 years of waiting, distilled into a single breath of arrival. I thought it was the best sound I had ever heard. I knew, only going to think that until Mira laughed for the first time, which happened 3 days later and was better. But that is a different story for a different day. This one, the silence, the scratch, the clever maid who broke 2 centuries with a jar of tallow oil and a battered record book, and the uncomplicated honesty of a woman who walks through open doors. This one ends here, in the tower, in the warm quiet, with my wolf's tail sweeping the stone and the ink still drying on the record. Some problems, it turns out, are more interesting than they appear. And some doors, when they open all the way.